At first I thought it was love, but I discovered in the worst possible way that some men only know how to love with closed fists. Hello, my dears. My name is Carla, but you can call me Grandma Carla. I'm 72 years old, and I was born in Harrisburg, Pennsylvania in 1953. Today, I want to share with you a story that I've kept deep in my heart for over 40 years. A story that even my own grandchildren don't fully know. Before I begin, I'd like to ask where you're watching this video from. Leave it in the comments below. I love knowing that my voice is reaching so many different corners of America. And if you could, please give this video a thumbs up and subscribe to the channel. It helps this old lady continue sharing her stories. Harrisburg in the 70s was quite different from what it is today. The cobblestone streets, the old houses with their large iron gates, the smell of the Susquehanna River. It was a city that breathed tradition, where everyone knew everyone, and where proper young ladies, as I was considered, had to follow very strict rules. I was an elementary school teacher back then, teaching at Lincoln Elementary. I loved my students, loved teaching. I was 25, with long black hair down to my waist, and they said I had the liveliest eyes in town. I'm not bragging, my dears, it's just that back then I really was full of life, full of dreams. I thought the world was at my feet. My mother, Mrs. Zulmira, was always telling me, "Carla, girl, you need to find a husband. An unmarried schoolteacher doesn't look good." That's how it was back then, you see. Women had to get married, have children, take care of the house. It didn't matter if you were happy doing other things. The path was already laid out for us. It was at a school fundraiser that I met Mark. My goodness, how handsome that man was. Tall, strong, with a well-trimmed mustache that was fashionable at the time, and a smile that seemed to light up the entire room. He had come from Philadelphia to work as a manager at the First National Bank that had just opened a new branch in Harrisburg. "Would you do me the honor of this dance?" he asked, extending his hand to me in the middle of the fundraiser. I felt my knees weaken. Just imagine, a man like that, so elegant, so well-spoken, wanting to dance with me. From that day on, Mark became the main topic in the teacher's lounge. "Carla, did you see how the bank manager only had eyes for you?" My colleagues commented, some with envy, others with genuine happiness for me. A week after the fundraiser, he appeared at the school door with a bouquet of daisies. To this day, I don't know how he discovered they were my favorite flowers. "Would you have dinner with me on Saturday, Miss Carla?" he asked, in front of everyone, making me blush to the roots of my hair. How could I say no? And to be honest with you, my dears, I didn't want to say no. That man had affected me in a way that no other had managed before. Our courtship was like a fairy tale. Mark was everything a girl could dream of at that time. Educated, gentlemanly, respectful. He opened the car door for me, pulled out my chair for me to sit in restaurants, brought me small gifts for no special reason. A book he had seen and thought of me. A chocolate when he knew I was tired after a difficult day at school. "Carla, you're the most incredible woman I've ever met," he would tell me, holding my hands in his. "I've never seen anyone with so much love for life, with so much passion for what they do. And the best part, he seemed genuinely interested in my work. He asked about my students, about my teaching methods, listened attentively when I talked about one child's difficulties or another's. At that time, this was rare. A man who valued a woman's work was practically an endangered species. My mother was in heaven, of course. Daughter, hold on to that man. Bank manager, handsome, educated. That's the kind of catch that doesn't come along twice in a lifetime. 6 months after we met, at a candlelit dinner at the best restaurant in town, he knelt and took a velvet box from his pocket. "Carla, would you make me the happiest man in the world by agreeing to be my wife?" The ring was beautiful, a small diamond that sparkled like a star. But more beautiful than the ring was the sparkle in his eyes, or at least that's what I thought at the time. "Yes," I answered without hesitation. At that moment, I truly believed I had found the man of my life, my companion, my safe harbor. The wedding was in the summer of 1979. A simple but beautiful ceremony at First Presbyterian Church. I wore a white dress that my mother and I sewed together, with lace that came specially from New York. Mark was very elegant in a tailored navy blue suit. When we entered the reception together, I felt as if I was floating. It was the happiest day of my life. Forever, he whispered in my ear during our first dance as husband and wife. If only I had known what forever would really mean. The first few months were wonderful, like a continuation of our courtship. We had bought a simple but cozy house in the suburbs. I continued teaching. He worked at the bank. On weekends, we went to Lake Harrisburg, had barbecues with friends, went to the movies. We were happy, or at least I was. It was on our first wedding anniversary that I noticed the first sign. We had arranged to have dinner out at the same restaurant where he had proposed to me. I got all dressed up, put on my best dress, the perfume he had given me as a gift. I waited, and Mark never showed up. When he finally appeared around 10 at night, he smelled of alcohol and had an irritated expression. "Sorry, I had a last-minute meeting at the bank," he said dryly, without looking me in the eye. Later, I discovered that the meeting had been at the bar with his work colleagues. It was the first of many lies to come. Gradually, almost imperceptibly, things began to change. The attentive, affectionate Mark, interested in my affairs, gave way to a distant, irritable, critical man. "Do you really need to wear that dress? Isn't it a little tight on you?" he would comment, making me feel insecure about my body. "This habit of yours of talking to everyone, it almost seems like you're flirting with other people's husbands," he would say, when I simply exchanged a few words with neighbors or couple friends. My work, which he had once valued so much, became a reason for constant criticism. Why continue teaching? The salary is a pittance, and you come home too tired to properly take care of the house. But I resisted. I loved my students, loved teaching. It was the only thing that made me feel I was still myself, the Carla that existed before being Mark's wife. In 1982, I became pregnant with our first and only child, Raphael. I thought a baby might bring us closer again, bring back the Mark from the beginning. For a brief period, it worked. During pregnancy, he went back to being attentive, concerned, present. He fixed up the baby's room, went with me to doctor's appointments, massaged my swollen feet at night. "It's going to be a boy, I'm sure," he would say, running his hand over my belly. "Strong like his father." And it was a boy indeed. Raphael was born on a spring morning, healthy, with his father's eyes and my upturned nose. Mark seemed like the proudest man in the world when he held his son for the first time. "My champion," he whispered, kissing the baby's forehead. But the honeymoon was short-lived. With sleepless nights, diapers to change, the baby crying, Mark's irritation returned in full force. "Can't you make that boy stop crying? How am I going to work tomorrow without sleeping properly?" he would complain, going to sleep in the living room when Raphael had colic and cried all night. It was during this time that the first aggressions began. Not physical, not yet. They were words, looks, heavy silences that hurt more than slaps. "Look at the state of this house. It doesn't even look like you stay here all day. What do you do, huh?" What did I do? I took care of a baby, breastfed every 3 hours, washed mountains of dirty baby clothes, tried to cook, clean, be a good mother and a good wife, all at the same time, alone, without help. Gradually, I began to close myself off, to keep quiet, trying not to provoke that constant irritation. I learned to predict what might bother him and avoided doing anything that could trigger it. The house always impeccable, dinner always ready at the right time, the baby always clean and calm when he arrived. It was like walking on eggshells all the time. When Raphael was about 2 years old, I needed to go back to teaching. Mark's salary, although good, wasn't enough, or at least that's what he said. Later I discovered that a good part of the money went to alcohol, gambling, and, well, other women. Going back to the classroom was like breathing again after being submerged for a long time. Among the children, with my books and notebooks, I returned to being myself, not the frightened shadow I had become at home, but teacher Carla, confident, cheerful, respected. I think that's what he couldn't stand. Seeing that, outside the house, away from him, I could still be happy. The accusations of betrayal started soon after. For no reason at all, without the slightest evidence. "Who is he?" Mark would ask out of nowhere while we were having dinner. "The principal? Some student's father? Tell me, Carla, who is the man who's eating my food, sleeping in my bed?" "There's no one, Mark. I've never cheated on you. I would never cheat, but it didn't help. When suspicion enters a relationship, it's like a poison that contaminates everything. He began to show up unexpectedly at school, to follow me when I went out with friends, to go through my bag, to read my lesson planning notebooks looking for non-existent notes. And then, one night in 1986, the first physical aggression happened. I had gone to a parent-teacher meeting that extended beyond what was planned. When I got home, Mark was already waiting for me at the door, his face red with anger, his eyes bloodshot from alcohol. "Where were you, you slut?" he shouted, grabbing my arm so hard that it left purple marks. "At school, Mark! At the meeting! You knew about this!" "Liar!" he yelled, and then came the first slap. Strong, unexpected, which made me fall to the floor of the living room. I stayed there, paralyzed by shock, feeling the metallic taste of blood in my mouth. I couldn't believe that was happening, that the man who had once promised me eternal love was now raising his hand against me. Raphael, 4 years old at the time, watched everything from the hallway, his little eyes wide with fear. This image, my son witnessing his father assaulting me, was what hurt the most. More than the slap, more than the cruel words. "Go to your room, my love," I managed to say to him, trying to smile so as not to frighten him even more. "Mom and Dad are just talking." After that first time, it was as if a barrier had been broken. The slaps became pushes, the pushes became punches, the punches became kicks, always followed by remorse, promises, vows of change. "Forgive me, my love, I don't know what came over me," he would say the next day, bringing flowers, chocolates, gifts. "It will never happen again, I swear on my life." And I believed him, or pretended to believe. Because what else could I do? It was the 80s, in a small town, with a young child to raise. Where would I go? How would I support myself? What would people say? I tried to ask for help a few times. To my mother first. "Marriage is just like that, daughter," she said, as if being beaten was a normal part of a wife's life. "Men have a strong temperament. We need to know how to work around it, not provoke it." To a friend from school later. "Oh, Carla, are you sure? Mark seems like such a good father, such a good husband. Aren't you exaggerating a little bit?" And finally, in a moment of desperation, to the police. "Look, ma'am, husband and wife fights. We don't get involved, you know," said Sergeant Johnson, Mark's fishing buddy. I became increasingly isolated. I lost friends, lost confidence, lost joy. I lived in a constant state of alertness, always expecting the next explosion, always trying to avoid the inevitable. It was only when Raphael was 12 that I found the courage. Not for myself. I had already accepted that this would be my life. But for him, because I realized I was raising a son in a toxic environment, teaching him that love and violence could go hand in hand, that it was normal for a man to hit a woman. One night, after another session of screaming and slapping because dinner wasn't the way Mark wanted, Raphael came into my room while I was crying, trying to hide my black eye with makeup. "Mom," he said, with a seriousness that no child should have, "we need to leave. Dad will end up killing you one day." It was like a slap, another one, but of reality. My son, my boy, seeing what I could no longer see, that I was in a relationship that could cost my life. That same week, while Mark was on a business trip, later I discovered he was with his mistress in Atlantic City, I packed our things, took the savings I had been hiding for years in a false bottom of the sock drawer, and fled with Raphael to my sister's house in Pittsburgh. The divorce was a war. Mark used all his power, his connections, his money, to make me look like a crazy woman, a negligent mother, an ungrateful wife. But I had evidence, photos of the bruises, witnesses to the verbal abuse, even a recording of one of his rage explosions that Raphael had made secretly with a tape recorder. After almost a year of legal battle, I got the divorce and custody of my son. Mark kept the house and almost all the assets, but I had my freedom. And that, my dears, was priceless. We started from scratch in Pittsburgh. I got a job at a public school, rented a small but cozy apartment, made new friends. Raphael, free from the toxic environment, flourished, started smiling again, playing, being a child. For 10 years, I had no news of Mark beyond what was necessary regarding issues related to Raphael. I heard, through mutual acquaintances, that he had remarried and divorced shortly after, that he continued at the bank, that he had been promoted, that he continued drinking. Gradually, the wounds healed. They didn't disappear. Some marks remain forever, but they stopped hurting constantly. I began to feel beautiful, intelligent, capable again. I began to believe that I deserved good things. In 2001, with Raphael already in college in Philadelphia, I decided to return to Harrisburg. The city had changed. I had changed. I wasn't afraid of running into Mark on the streets anymore. I heard he had moved to Florida years before. I missed the smell, the streets, the accent of my hometown. I bought a simple little house in the Highland neighborhood with a small garden where I planted roses of all colors. I retired as a teacher, but continued giving private lessons to children with learning difficulties. I had my group of friends, my activities at church, my organized and peaceful life. I was finally at peace, or so I thought. If this story is touching your heart, please leave your like and subscribe to the channel. Now I'm going to tell you how my peaceful life was interrupted in the most brutal way possible when, after so many years, Mark crossed my path again. But also how I found within myself a strength I didn't know existed. I'd also like to take this moment to ask you in the comments, have you ever had a great love? Are you still living with them? Tell me in the comments because I'm quite curious. Many of you must be wondering how a man who seemed so perfect turned into the monster I described. I'll now tell you how I realized I had married a stranger, not the man I met. The first signs appeared so subtly that I didn't even notice. Like that story about the frog in the pot, you know? If you throw a frog into boiling water, it jumps out right away. But if you put it in cold water and heat it up slowly, the poor thing doesn't even realize it's being cooked alive. That's how it was with me. It started with small comments about my clothes. Isn't that dress a bit too showy for a teacher, Carla? Then came criticisms of my way of talking, laughing, behaving in public. Do you really need to tell all these school stories at dinner? Nobody's interested. Mark had two personalities. In public, he continued to be the perfect husband, attentive, polite, affectionate. Everyone in Harrisburg thought I had won the marriage lottery. How lucky you are, Carla. Mark is such a special man. If only they knew what happened when the doors closed. I remember a dinner at the regional bank manager's house in 1981. Mark was particularly nervous that day. It's an important opportunity, he repeated while getting ready. Don't ruin everything. I had spent the entire afternoon preparing. Hair done at the salon, the navy blue dress he thought was appropriate, discreet makeup as he preferred. I even mentally rehearsed the allowed topics. Nothing about school, nothing about politics, nothing that might seem like I had my own opinion. During dinner, the regional manager, Mr. Patterson, a bald gentleman in his 50s, asked me about my work. I got a little animated and told him about a reading project I was developing with my students. Mr. Patterson seemed genuinely interested, asking questions, praising the initiative. On the way home, as soon as we got in the car, Mark exploded. You just can't keep your mouth shut, can you? Had to show off, showing that you're a teacher, that you have ideas, that you're intelligent. But he asked Mark, what did you want me to do? Be rude? The slap came so hard that my head hit the car window. I wanted you to be discreet, to let me shine. It was my night, my chance for promotion. I arrived home with a split lip and the certainty that this was not the man with whom I had dreamed of building a life. The assaults gradually got worse. What started with slaps evolved into punches, kicks, shoves against the wall. Mark was careful to hit where the marks wouldn't show. On the stomach, back, thighs. When he accidentally left a visible mark, I made up excuses. I hit my face on the cabinet door, I explained to my principal when I showed up with a black eye at school. She looked at me for a long time, a look that said she didn't believe a word, but also didn't know how to help. Be careful, Carla. Those cabinets, they're treacherous. In 1984, I discovered the first betrayal. Mark was taking a shower when his cell phone, an expensive novelty at the time, rang. I answered without thinking. Hi, honey. Everything okay? I miss you. When will we see each other again? The voice was young, sweet, confident. I hung up without answering. When I confronted Mark, The reaction was explosive. "Now you're snooping through my phone? Who do you think you are? I'm your wife, and you're cheating on me." The beating that day was so violent that I couldn't go to work for a week. I told the school I had fallen down the stairs. Another lie to protect the monster who lived in my house. The betrayals became frequent. Different perfumes on his shirt, lipstick stains, motel charges on the credit card. And with each discovery of mine, his reaction became more violent. In 1987, I contracted a sexually transmitted disease. The doctor, embarrassed, explained to me that my husband would need treatment too. "Doctor, this can only come from sexual intercourse, right?" I asked, already knowing the answer. "Yes, Mrs. Carla. There is no other form of contagion." I arrived home determined to confront him once and for all. Raphael was at a friend's house. It was time to lay the cards on the table. "Mark, we need to talk. I went to the doctor today and—" I couldn't finish the sentence. He flew at me like a wild animal. "You slut! You've been cheating on me and still have the nerve to claim you're sick?" The beating that day left me unconscious. When I came to, I was on the kitchen floor, a trickle of blood running from my forehead. Mark was sitting at the table, calmly drinking. "Next time you make up a story like that, you won't wake up," he said, without even looking at me. I realized at that moment that he could really kill me. It wasn't just an empty threat. And worst of all, he would feel justified. I began to secretly plan my escape. I saved small amounts of money that I hid inside an oatmeal can in the kitchen cabinet. I separated important documents, photos, things I couldn't leave behind. I packed a small suitcase and hid it at the back of the closet, under old blankets. But I didn't have the courage to go. Not yet. The fear was greater than the desire for freedom. Fear of what he would do if he found me. Fear of the scandal. Fear of not being able to support my son alone. In 1989, Mark lost his job at the bank. I never knew exactly why. He said it was political persecution, but I heard from acquaintances that it had something to do with missing money and a young female client who threatened to sue the bank for harassment. With unemployment, things drastically worsened. Mark began to drink even more, to stay at home all day, to control my every step. I could no longer call anyone without him by my side, listening to the conversation. I couldn't go to the market without saying exactly how long it would take and where I would go. Raphael, 7 years old at the time, began to have problems at school. He was aggressive with classmates, inattentive in class, had constant nightmares. The school psychologist called me in for a talk. "Mrs. Carla, Raphael drew this in art class today." She showed me a paper where my son had drawn a large, threatening male figure with what appeared to be a belt in his hand, and 2 smaller figures, one fallen on the floor with red spots, another hidden behind a rectangle that I imagined to be a bed or sofa. My heart froze. "It's just his imagination," I tried to explain, without much conviction. "Mrs. Carla," the psychologist held my hands, looking directly into my eyes. "Children express on paper what they cannot say with words. Raphael is asking for help." Those words hit me like lightning. My son, my boy, was suffering, was being damaged by that situation as much as I was. And unlike me, he hadn't chosen to be there. It was the push I needed. The following week, when Mark left for a job interview, I picked up Raphael from school, the hidden suitcases, and we went to the bus station. We bought tickets to Pittsburgh, where my sister lived. "Where are we going, Mom?" Raphael asked, confused by that sudden departure. "To a safe place, my love. A place where no one will shout or hit us anymore." His little eyes widened, a mixture of fear and hope. "And Dad?" "Your father. Needs help that we can't give. Maybe someday, when he's better, you can see each other again." It was the hardest and also the bravest thing I've ever done in my life, leaving everything behind, house, furniture, memories, the life I knew, to start from scratch. But I was absolutely certain that if I stayed, I wouldn't live to see Raphael grow up. Mark's reaction was exactly what I feared. Threatening calls to my sister's phone. "I'll find you, you slut. I'll bring my son back and you'll regret being born." He showed up in Pittsburgh 2 weeks later, drunk, shouting in front of my sister's building. The police were called. He spent the night at the police station, was released on the condition that he return to Harrisburg immediately. But that was just the beginning of the war. He hired an expensive lawyer, filed for custody of Raphael, claiming that I was mentally unstable, that I had abandoned the home, that I was a negligent mother. Luckily, my sister knew a lawyer who agreed to represent me, charging only what I could afford. Dr. Nestor was an elderly gentleman with vast experience in family law and an even bigger heart. "Mrs. Carla," he told me at our first meeting, "don't worry. The truth always comes out in these situations, and your truth is stamped on your son's face." The process was long and painful. I had to relive every abuse, every humiliation, every mark. Raphael, at only 8 years old, had to speak with social workers, psychologists, the judge. It was an ordeal for all of us. But Dr. Nestor was right. The truth came out. Former neighbors testified to having heard screams, crying, sounds of aggression. Doctors confirmed old injuries consistent with domestic violence. The school psychologist presented the drawings and reports on Raphael's behavior. And most importantly, my son, with a courage that moved me, told his truth. "My father hit my mother almost every day," he told the judge, his voice trembling but firm. "I would hide under the bed, but I could still hear everything." In September 1990, we left the courthouse with custody granted to me. Mark would have the right to bi-weekly visits, always supervised by a social worker. He never showed up for any of them. For years, we had no more news of him, except for occasional rumors. That he had gone back to work in banking, but in a lower position. That he had remarried and divorced shortly after. That he was having health problems because of drinking. I rebuilt my life in Pittsburgh. I got a job as a teacher, made new friends, even started going out with a coworker. Nothing serious, just a coffee here, a movie there. I was learning to trust again, to smile without fear, to be myself. Raphael grew up strong, intelligent, kind, the opposite of his father in every way. On the rare occasions when we touched on the subject of Mark, he would say, "Mom, he taught me one important thing, the kind of man I never want to be." In 2001, with Raphael already in college in Philadelphia studying engineering, I decided it was time to return to my roots. Harrisburg had been the scene of my nightmare, but it was also my hometown, where I grew up, where I had good memories of childhood and youth. I bought a simple house in the Highland neighborhood, far from the house where we had lived with Mark. A place of my own, with a small garden where I planted roses of all colors, a luxury I could never have during the marriage, as he thought it was a waste of money. I retired as a teacher, but continued giving private lessons to children with difficulties. It was a simple, quiet, happy life in its own way. I had my friends, my crafts group at church, my plants, my books. I talked to Raphael almost daily on the phone, and he came to visit whenever he could. In 2003, I heard from an old acquaintance that Mark had returned to Harrisburg. He was sick, liver cirrhosis, a consequence of years of alcoholism, and had come to stay with an older brother who still lived in the city. I felt a strange mixture of emotions upon receiving the news. It wasn't hatred, nor fear. Perhaps a kind of distant pity, as if he were a character in a sad story I had read a long time ago. "Are you okay with that?" my friend asked, concerned. "I am," I answered, and it was true. This city is big enough for both of us. What I didn't know was that Harrisburg wouldn't be big enough to keep a distance from the man who had destroyed so many years of my life. And that even sick, aged, apparently defeated by life, Mark still harbored within himself the same monster as always, just waiting for the right moment to reappear. Starting over at 37 wasn't easy. I had only a suitcase of clothes, some hidden savings, and a traumatized son to raise. But when we arrived in Pittsburgh, at my sister Helen's house, I felt for the first time in years that I could breathe without fear. "Welcome to your new life," Helen said, as she opened the door to the small 2-bedroom apartment where she lived alone since her separation. Not many explanations were necessary. She had always suspected something was wrong in my marriage, even with all my skill at hiding the marks and forcing smiles. The apartment was cramped for 3 people, but it seemed like a palace compared to the house of horrors where I lived with Mark. There were no shouts, no doors slamming, no sound of heavy footsteps announcing danger, just the comforting silence of peace. Raphael slept with me in the guest room. In the first few weeks, he woke up screaming almost every night. "He's going to find us, Mom. He's going to take us back." I hugged him tightly, feeling his small heart racing against my chest. "We're safe now, my love. No one is going to hurt us anymore." It was a promise I wasn't sure I could keep, but I repeated it with all the conviction I could muster. Pittsburgh was a university town, vibrant, full of opportunities. Helen worked as a nurse at the university hospital, and through her contacts, I got an interview for a substitute teacher position at a public school. I remember how nervous I felt that morning. I carefully chose my only interview outfit, a navy blue skirt and a simple white blouse that I had brought in the suitcase. Helen lent me a pair of shoes and a discreet necklace. "You're going to nail it," she said, as I looked at myself in the mirror, trying to recognize the woman staring back at me. She was no longer the confident young woman from before the marriage, nor the frightened shadow of the last years with Mark. She was someone in between, trying to rebuild herself. The school principal, Mrs. Jenkins, was a lady in her 60s, gray hair pulled back in a severe bun, thick framed glasses on the tip of her nose. She analyzed my resume for long minutes while I tried to control the trembling in my hands. 10 years of experience in Harrisburg. Good references, she murmured, without raising her eyes from the paper. "Why did you leave there, Miss Carla?" The question I feared. I had rehearsed various answers the night before, all avoiding the complete truth. Family matters. Needed a change. Came to accompany my sister. But sitting there, before that woman who seemed to see through my rehearsed words, I decided to risk the truth. I fled from an abusive marriage, Mrs. Jenkins. My ex-husband had been abusing me for years. I left with just my son and what fit in a suitcase. I'm starting from scratch. She slowly removed her glasses, her eyes now fixed on mine. For a moment, I thought I had made a terrible mistake, that she would judge me unstable, problematic, a bad influence on the students. "My dear," she finally said, her voice softening in a way that didn't match her austere appearance. "You're not starting from scratch. You're starting with 10 years of experience, with your courage, with your ability to protect your son. That's worth more than any diploma." I started working the following week. A 4th grade class, 30 curious and noisy children who quickly became my safe haven. In the classroom, I was still Miss Carla, competent, creative, respected. There, for a few hours a day, I could forget I was a woman fleeing from her own past. The salary wasn't much, but with Helen's help with expenses, we managed to get by. In 3 months, we had saved enough to rent a small apartment near the school, just 1 bedroom, a tiny living room, and a kitchen that barely fit 2 people. But it was ours. A safe space, just ours. The first night in our new home was magical. We had a picnic on the living room floor, since we didn't have a table yet, eating sandwiches and drinking soda straight from the bottle, something Mark would never allow. "We're on an adventure, aren't we, Mom?" Raphael asked, his eyes shining with a joy I hadn't seen in a long time. "Yes, my love. The biggest adventure of our lives." But not everything was rosy. The divorce process was a cruel battle. Mark used all the resources at his disposal to destroy me. He hired one of the most expensive lawyers in Harrisburg, made absurd accusations about my mental health, my ability as a mother, my morals. She abandoned the home without reason. She ran away with my son. She has a lover in Pittsburgh, he would shout in the courthouse corridors when we met for hearings. Dr. Nestor, my lawyer, an elderly gentleman with decades of experience in family law, advised me to stay calm. "Let him show who he really is, Carla. The truth always comes out." And it did. During a particularly tense hearing, when Mark was shouting increasingly absurd accusations, the judge called for silence and addressed him. "Mr. Mark, you are exhibiting exactly the behavior that your ex-wife describes in her testimonies. Aggressiveness, emotional instability, tendency to intimidate. You're making this court's job much easier." It was a small victory that gave me strength to continue fighting. Raphael, at only 8 years old, went through evaluations with psychologists, social workers, the judge. It was painful to see him having to talk about the terrible things he witnessed, but his courage also filled me with pride. "My father hit my mother," he said during a session with the court psychologist, his voice small but firm. "I saw blood many times. She said she had fallen, but I knew it was a lie." In September 1990, After almost a year of legal battle, the judge granted me permanent custody. Mark would have the right to bi-weekly visits supervised by a social worker. "I don't want to see him," Raphael said when I told him about the visits. "I'm afraid." "You don't need to be afraid, my love. There will always be someone with you, and if you don't want to continue, we can ask the judge to review this." But it was never necessary. Mark didn't show up for any of the scheduled visits. It seemed that once he could no longer control me, he lost interest in his own son. The following years were ones of reconstruction. Slow, sometimes painful, but steady. From substitute teacher, I became permanent. We rented a larger apartment in a better neighborhood. I managed to buy a used car, a freedom I never had during the marriage, since Mark wouldn't allow me to drive. "It's too dangerous for women," he would say. But in truth, it was just another way to keep me dependent, isolated. Raphael adapted well to the new school, made friends, started practicing martial arts, something that helped him a lot to channel the anger and fear he still carried inside. Gradually, the nightmares diminished, the frightened expression giving way to more frequent smiles. I was healing too. I started therapy, a luxury I paid for with sacrifice, but which was essential for my recovery. Gradually, I began to understand the mechanisms of abuse, how I had fallen into that trap, how I could avoid repeating the pattern. "The fault was never yours, Carla," my therapist, Dr. Elizabeth, always repeated whenever I began to question myself. Abusers are masters of manipulation, of making the victim feel responsible. It was a long process learning not to blame myself, not to think, if I had been a better wife, if I had kept the house cleaner, if I hadn't provoked him, to understand that nothing, absolutely nothing, justifies violence. In 1994, 4 years after the divorce, I allowed myself to start living again, not just surviving. I accepted an invitation from a fellow teacher for coffee after class. Anthony was a widower, had 2 teenage children, and a gentleness in his eyes that reminded me of the father I lost as a child. Our first meeting was at a coffee shop near the school. I was so nervous that I spilled sugar on the table, my hands trembling as I tried to organize my thoughts. I hadn't gone out with a man in so long that I had forgotten what it was like. "You don't need to be nervous, Carla," Anthony said, his voice calm as always. "We're just 2 friends having coffee." But it was more than that, and we both knew it. It was a giant step for me, a statement that I still believed there could be kindness in men, that not all of them were like Mark. Anthony and I dated for almost 2 years. It was a sweet, respectful relationship, without pressure. He understood my traumas, respected my boundaries, never demanded more than I could give. "You deserve to be loved the right way," he would tell me when I apologized for some insecurity, some sudden fear. We never moved in together or got married. Perhaps I would never be ready for that again. But he taught me that intimacy doesn't have to mean control, that love doesn't have to hurt. In 1997, Raphael was accepted to Carnegie Mellon University for civil engineering. I'll never forget his illuminated face when he saw his name on the list of accepted students. "I did it, Mom. I did it." I hugged him tightly, tears flowing freely down my face. That frightened boy who fled with me with a suitcase of clothes was turning into a brilliant, strong, upright man, despite everything, or perhaps because of everything we had lived through. It was around this time that I began to feel the call to return to my roots. Harrisburg was no longer the scene of my nightmare. It was the city where I was born, where I had happy moments before Mark, where I still had childhood friends, cousins, aunts. "Are you sure, Mom?" Raphael asked, worried when I told him about my desire to return. "What if he's still there? I'm not going to live in fear forever, son. I've already given him too much power over my life." In 2001, with Raphael already settled in an apartment near the university, I decided it was time. I made arrangements for my early retirement as a teacher. The years of contribution in Harrisburg, plus the years in Pittsburgh, guaranteed me this right. Anthony and I said goodbye with affection and the promise to keep in touch. His children were already on their way in life, and he was planning to move to the coast soon to fulfill the dream of a bed and breakfast by the sea. "You'll be fine, Carla," he told me at our last meeting. "You're the strongest woman I've ever met." I returned to Harrisburg on a spring day in 2001. The characteristic smell of the city, a mixture of the Susquehanna River with the sweet scent of the chocolate factory, hit me as soon as I got off the bus. It was as if time had stood still in many ways. With my small savings and the money from selling the car, I managed to buy a simple house in the Highland neighborhood, far from the area where I lived with Mark, where I could truly start from zero. The house needed renovations, but it had a sunny backyard where I started planting a garden, something I always wanted and never could have during the marriage. Roses, sunflowers, lavender, herbs for tea. My own little paradise. I started giving private lessons to supplement my retirement. Children with learning difficulties, teenagers needing reinforcement for college entrance exams. The work kept me active, connected, useful. I renewed old friendships, made new ones. I joined a crafts group at the neighborhood church, started attending a senior choir, even though I didn't consider myself elderly yet at 48. Life was simple, but satisfying. Raphael graduated with honors in 2002 and got a good job at an engineering firm in Philadelphia. He would visit me regularly, always concerned that I was really okay, really safe. "Mark never came after you?" he would always ask, the old fear still present in his eyes. "No, my son. And even if he did, I'm no longer that frightened woman. I've learned to defend myself." It was true. Besides the therapy that I continued doing, even if less frequently, I had taken a self-defense course in Pittsburgh, had installed reinforced locks on all doors and windows of the house, kept pepper spray in my purse and beside the bed. I didn't live in fear, but I wasn't naive either. I knew that abusers rarely give up easily on their victims. Statistically, the most dangerous period for a woman is precisely when she manages to leave the abusive relationship. The abuser, without the control he had before, frequently resorts to increasingly desperate and violent acts. I had escaped that fate once, when I fled to Pittsburgh. But now, being back in Harrisburg, I knew I needed to keep my eyes open. In 2003, through an old school colleague whom I met by chance at the market, I learned that Mark had returned to Harrisburg. He was sick, liver cirrhosis, and had come to stay with his older brother who still lived in the city. The news didn't affect me as much as I feared. I didn't feel fear or anger, just a strange indifference, as if it were information about a stranger, not about the man who had destroyed so many years of my life. "Are you okay with this?" my friend asked, genuinely concerned. "I am," I answered honestly. "This city is big enough for both of us." That night, I called Raphael to tell him the news, trying to sound casual so as not to alarm him. "Mom, I don't like this," he said immediately. "Why don't you come to Philadelphia? We can find an apartment near mine." "Son, I'm not going to let him drive me out of my city again. I've already run away once. I'm not running away again." I promised Raphael to take extra precautions, stay alert to any strange movement, not walk alone at night. It was enough to calm him down, but not enough to prevent what was to come. For months, I had no sign of Mark. I occasionally heard about him, that he was increasingly sick, that he rarely left his brother's house, that he drank despite medical recommendations. But I never saw him. We never crossed paths in the streets of the city. I began to relax, to lower my guard. Maybe he didn't even know I had returned. Maybe he didn't care anymore. Maybe he was too busy fighting his own disease to worry about ghosts from the past. I was wrong. Terribly wrong. One night in June 2004, while I was grading papers from my private students, I heard a strange noise coming from the back of the house. I thought it might be some cat in the yard. I had started feeding a stray that appeared regularly. "Kitty?" I called, opening the kitchen door that led to the yard. "Is that you, little one?" Darkness greeted me. The yard was silent, except for the soft rustling of the rose leaves in the wind. I shrugged and went back inside, locking the door behind me. I didn't realize that by opening that door, I had sealed my fate. I didn't realize that eyes were watching me from the shadows. Eyes I knew very well, eyes that I once thought were the window to the soul of the man I loved, but that had long since become the entrance to my worst nightmare. Mark had found me, and he wasn't ready to leave me in peace. I finished grading my students' work around 10 at night. I was exhausted, but satisfied with the progress that little Matthew was making with reading. That boy reminded me so much of Raphael at the same age. Curious eyes, sharp mind, just needing a little more attention to blossom. I put the notebooks in the folder, had a cup of chamomile tea, a ritual I adopted to calm my nerves after so many years of therapy, and prepared for bed. I turned on the small radio on the nightstand, tuned to a station that played oldies. That night, it was Elton John. Your song filled the room as I brushed my hair, now more gray than black, in front of the mirror. I was almost asleep when I heard another noise, different from the previous one, more defined. It sounded like glass breaking. I sat up in bed, my heart racing. Must be some neighbor, I thought, trying to convince myself. But then I heard footsteps, inside the house, in the kitchen. There was no doubt now. Someone had broken into my house. I grabbed the cell phone on the bedside table, a Nokia brick that Raphael had insisted I have, and dialed 911. Before I could speak to the operator, the bedroom door opened. And there he was. Mark, 15 years older, his face yellowed by liver disease, thinner, hair now completely gray, but still with those same eyes. Eyes that I knew filled with false love, then saw overflowing with hatred, and now something worse. A mixture of anger, obsession, and something I can only describe as madness. "Found you, Carla," he said, his slurred voice revealing he had been drinking. "Finally found you." The cell phone fell from my hand. My entire body froze. All those years of therapy, of rebuilding, of strengthening, seemed to evaporate in an instant. It was as if I had gone back to being that terrified woman from 20 years ago. "What do you want, Mark?" I managed to ask, trying to buy time, trying to think of a way out. "It's late. I'm tired." He laughed, a dry laugh without humor. "What do I want? What do I want?" he repeated, advancing a few steps. "I want you to pay for what you did to me." "What did I do to you?" I asked, genuinely confused. "You ruined my life," he shouted, punching the wall beside him. "You humiliated me, made me lose my son, my job, my respect." The inversion was so absurd that for a moment I almost laughed. It was so typical of abusers to blame their victims, to transform themselves into martyrs in their own distorted narrative. "You ruined your own life, Mark," I replied, finding courage from I don't know where. "With your choices, your violence, your alcoholism." It was the wrong thing to say. His face contorted with rage, and he lunged at me. I tried to run, but the bedroom was small. There was nowhere to go. He grabbed me by the arms, his fingers digging into my flesh with enough force to leave marks. "You're going to listen to me now, you slut. You're going to hear everything I've kept inside for 15 years. The smell of alcohol on his breath was nauseating, mixed with the characteristic odor of the disease consuming him. I tried to break free, but he was still much stronger than me, despite his age and deteriorated health. "Let me go, Mark. I already called the police. They're on their way," I lied, trying to scare him. He laughed again. "The police? You still think they're going to help you? You never learned, did you?" With a sudden movement, he threw me onto the bed. I fell on my back, the air escaping from my lungs with the impact. Before I could catch my breath, he was on top of me, one hand squeezing my throat, the other tearing my nightgown. "I'm going to teach you a lesson you'll never forget," he growled, his face so close to mine that I felt drops of saliva spraying on my face. At that moment, something broke inside me. Not out of fear, but out of anger. Anger for everything he had done to me. Anger for all the stolen years. Anger because he thought he still had the right to touch me, to hurt me. "No!" I shouted, gathering all the strength I had in my body. "Never again!" I managed to raise my knee forcefully, hitting him between the legs. He howled in pain, loosening his grip on my neck. It was enough for me to wriggle free, rolling to the side of the bed. But he recovered quickly. He grabbed my ankle when I tried to run to the door, pulling me back. I fell to the floor, hitting my chin hard. The metallic taste of blood filled my mouth. "You're going to pay for that, you cow!" he shouted, dragging me across the floor as if I were a sack of potatoes. I fought like I had never fought before. I kicked, scratched, bit. I managed to hit his face with my nails, leaving 3 red streaks on his yellowed cheek. This only enraged him more. He slapped me so hard I saw stars, then another, and another. My face burned, my ears were ringing. I tasted blood mixed with tears. "You are mine," he continued shouting between blows. You've always been mine. No one else can have you. I don't know how long that hell lasted. Minutes? Hours? Time seemed to have lost meaning. Each blow, each insult, each violation was an eternity of pain. At some point, I stopped fighting. Not out of surrender, but strategy. The more I resisted, the more violent he became. Maybe if I pretended submission, he would lower his guard. "Please, Mark," I begged, my voice broken by crying. "You're hurting me." "It's supposed to hurt," he replied. But the tone had changed. There was a sick satisfaction now, as if my suffering was exactly what he wanted. He lifted me from the floor by my hair, dragging me back to the bed. I was semi-conscious from pain, but my mind was working frantically. I knew what would come next. I knew that, if I allowed it, it would be like going back 20 years in time, losing everything I had rebuilt with so much effort. "Let's see if you're still good for something," he said, beginning to unbuckle his belt. It was at that moment that I saw the opportunity. On the bedside table, within my reach, was the heavy ceramic lamp that I had bought at a church craft fair. With him distracted with his own belt, I extended my hand and grabbed the lamp. I didn't think twice. With all the strength I could gather, I hit his head. The impact was so strong that the lamp broke, ceramic shards flying across the room. Mark staggered backward, dazed, blood flowing from a cut on his forehead. For a moment, I thought I had succeeded, that he would fall and I could escape. But he recovered too quickly. With an animalistic roar, he lunged at me again. This time, there was nothing within my reach to use as a weapon. I tried to roll away, but he grabbed my arm, twisting it behind my back with such force that I felt something snap in my shoulder. The pain was excruciating, tearing a scream from the depths of my throat. It was as if my entire arm was on fire. He had dislocated my shoulder. "Now you're going to learn who's in charge," he growled, turning me face down on the bed, pressing my face against the pillow with such force that I could barely breathe. Panic took over. He was going to kill me. After everything, after all the struggle, all the rebuilding, I was going to die at the hands of the same man who had already stolen so many years of my life. No, I couldn't allow it. With my good arm, I desperately felt around, looking for anything I could use as a weapon. My fingers touched something cold, metallic. The scissors I used to cut paper, which I had left on the bedside table after preparing material for a student. I grabbed the scissors, hiding them in the palm of my hand. I needed a moment, just one moment of distraction from him. It came when the phone in the living room started to ring. The shrill sound broke the air, making Mark slightly loosen the pressure on my neck, turning his head toward the noise. It was all I needed. With a quick movement, I turned my body and plunged the scissors into his chest with all the strength I had. The shock in his eyes is something I'll never forget. It wasn't pain, not yet. It was surprise, pure and complete surprise that I, his victim for so many years, had dared to fight back. He staggered backward, looking at the scissors buried to the handle between his ribs, blood beginning to soak his shirt. "You cow," he muttered, his voice already weak, his legs giving way under his weight. He fell to his knees first, then collapsed to the side on the bedroom floor. The blood began to form a pool around him, dark against the wooden floor. I remained paralyzed for a few seconds, unable to believe what had just happened. Then, survival instinct took over. Ignoring the excruciating pain in my dislocated arm, I crawled out of bed, picked up the cell phone that had fallen on the floor, and dialed 911 again. "Emergency," answered a female voice on the other end. "I need help," I managed to say, my voice trembling uncontrollably. "My ex-husband broke into my house. He attacked me. I stabbed him. There's a lot of blood." I gave my address between sobs, and the operator assured me that police and an ambulance were on their way. "Stay on the line with me, ma'am. Don't hang up." I looked at Mark lying on the floor. His eyes were open, fixed on me, but the gleam of hatred had disappeared. He seemed empty. His breathing was shallow, spaced out. Part of me wanted to help him, staunch the bleeding, do something. After all, despite everything, he was the father of my son. We had shared a life, even if filled with pain. But another part, the part that had fought for decades to survive, to rebuild, knew that approaching him would be risking my own life. Even wounded, even dying, he was still dangerous. I stayed in the farthest corner of the room, the phone pressed against my ear, my eyes fixed on him, ready to run if he moved. He didn't move. Even before the police arrived, Mark stopped breathing. His eyes, those eyes that once made me believe in fairy tales, became glazed, lifeless. The police arrived first, then the ambulance. The house was soon full of people, police officers taking photos, paramedics confirming the death, curious neighbors gathered on the sidewalk. I was taken to the hospital to treat my dislocated shoulder and other injuries. The doctor on duty, a young man of no more than 30, looked at my body covered in bruises and cuts with an expression that mixed horror and compassion. "Ma'am, I need to document these injuries," he said gently. "For the process, of course. I had killed a man. Even in self-defense, even after everything he did, I had taken a life. There would be consequences. At the police station, after being medicated, I gave my statement. I told everything. Not just about that night, but about the 20 years of abuse, about the escape to Pittsburgh, about the difficult divorce, about my return to Harrisburg. The detective, a middle-aged man with deep circles under his eyes, listened in silence, occasionally taking notes. "Do you have evidence of the history of violence?" he asked when I finished my account. "I have the divorce proceedings, the medical reports from that time, my son's testimony, witnesses in Pittsburgh and Harrisburg," I replied, exhausted but determined. "And I have this." I pointed to my body marked again by that man who swore to love me. I was released the following morning, after paying bail. The case would be investigated. There would be a trial. But the detective made it clear that everything indicated self-defense. As I left the police station, I found Raphael waiting for me. He had driven all night from Philadelphia after receiving the call from the police. "Mom," he shouted when he saw me, running to hug me carefully, aware of my injuries. "My God, look what he did to you." I hugged him with my good arm, the tears finally escaping after hours of emotional shock. "It's all okay now, son. All okay." But it wasn't, not really. I had killed a man, the father of my son, and although it had been in self-defense, although he had deserved it 1,000 times over, something inside me had changed forever that night. The following days were a blur of testimonies, examinations, consultations with lawyers. Raphael insisted that I go live with him in Philadelphia, at least until the trial. "I can't stay here, son," I agreed, looking at the house that had become my refuge and was now stained by yet another terrible memory. "But I also can't stay in Philadelphia forever. I need to face this, resolve this." The investigation took 3 months. Testimonies were collected from everyone who knew our history. Former neighbors in Harrisburg, colleagues from Pittsburgh, doctors who had treated me over the years, even Mark's brother with whom he had been living. To my surprise, his brother testified in my favor. Mark never got over the divorce, he told the police. He drank more and more, talked about getting revenge on his ex-wife. When he discovered she had returned to Harrisburg, he became obsessed. I started hiding the car keys so he wouldn't go out at night, but that night, I didn't realize he had left. The autopsy revealed that Mark's liver was completely destroyed by cirrhosis. According to the medical examiner, even without the scissors wound, he probably wouldn't have lived more than a few months. "In a way, ma'am, you only accelerated the inevitable," said the coroner during his testimony, receiving a disapproving look from the prosecutor. The trial took place in February 2005, 8 months after that terrible night. The court was full. Cases like mine weren't common in Harrisburg, especially involving people known in the community as Mark and I were. My lawyer built a solid defense based on the documented history of violence, the physical evidence of the break-in and assault, and the witnesses who confirmed Mark's obsession. The prosecutor, a young man with evident political ambitions, tried to paint me as a vindictive woman who had lured her sick ex-husband into a trap. But his allegations fell apart when we presented the photos of my injuries from that night, the medical report confirming the dislocated shoulder, the broken teeth, the cuts and bruises all over my body. After 3 days of trial, the judge announced his decision. This court recognizes that the defendant acted in self-defense, fearing for her life after being brutally attacked in her own residence. All evidence confirms that there was no other viable option to preserve her physical integrity. I declare the defendant innocent of all charges. A murmur ran through the court. I looked at Raphael, seated in the first row, tears streaming down his face as he silently applauded. At Helen, my sister, who had traveled from Pittsburgh to be with me. At some former students, now adults, who had come to support Miss Carla. I was free, legally free. But emotionally, I knew I still had a long road ahead. I returned to therapy, now dealing not only with the trauma of abuse, but with the guilt of having taken a life, even in self-defense. My therapist, a lady from Philadelphia specializing in cases of severe trauma, helped me understand that what I felt was normal. "You're a good person, Carla," she would tell me. "Good people feel remorse, even when they've done nothing wrong. That's what differentiates them from people like your ex-husband." I sold the house in Harrisburg. I would never be able to sleep peacefully in that room again, and bought a small apartment in Philadelphia near Raphael. I started teaching again, this time adults in a literacy program. Slowly, I healed. Not completely. Some wounds are too deep to fully close, but enough to smile again, to find pleasure in small things, to believe that there was still a future for me. In 2007, Raphael married Julia, an environmental engineer he met at work. She was everything I could wish for my son. Intelligent, kind, strong, and most importantly, they had a healthy relationship based on mutual respect. "She makes me want to be a better man, Mom," Raphael told me on the eve of the wedding. "Like you always wanted me to be." The following year, my first granddaughter, Clara, was born. Holding her in my arms for the first time was like a rebirth. That small life, so perfect, so full of possibilities, was also a symbol that our family history would not be defined by violence and abuse, that we had broken the cycle. "She has your eyes, Mom," Raphael said as I rocked my little granddaughter. Eyes that see far ahead. In the years that followed, I dedicated myself to two things: my family and other women who, like me, lived or had lived in situations of abuse. I started as a volunteer at a shelter for women victims of domestic violence in Philadelphia. Later, with the help of Raphael and some friends, we founded a small nonprofit that offered free legal and psychological support. "You transformed your pain into purpose," said a young mother, whom we helped leave an abusive relationship. "That gives me hope." Hope. That's what I wanted to offer. The certainty that, no matter how dark the night, there's always a dawn waiting, that no woman needs to accept abuse as her destiny, that there is life, full, rich, meaningful, beyond the walls of a house that became a prison. Today, at 72 years old, I look back and see a life full of ups and downs, of pains and joys, of defeats and mainly victories. I have 3 wonderful grandchildren, a son who is my greatest pride, a daughter-in-law who is like the daughter I never had. The story I shared with you today isn't easy to tell. There are parts of it that still hurt, even after so many years, but I feel it needed to be told, because I know there are many Carlas out there suffering in silence, thinking there is no way out. When I was acquitted by the court in February 2005, many people thought that would be the end of my story. Justice had been done, the monster was dead, the victim free. Just like that, like in movies that end with the villain defeated and the credits roll while happy music plays. But real life isn't like that, my dears. Real life is much more complicated, much deeper. Judicial acquittal didn't automatically bring acquittal from my heart. I had taken a life. No matter how monstrous Mark had been, no matter that I acted in self-defense, this fact weighed on me like a stone. The first nights after the trial were torment. I would wake up screaming, soaked in sweat, reliving those terrible moments over and over. I saw the blood spreading across the floor, his eyes losing their gleam, felt the scissors sinking into his flesh, and I would wake up with my heart racing, nausea rising in my throat. "Mom, you need professional help," Raphael insisted, after finding me sitting in the kitchen at 3 a.m, staring at nothing, a cup of cold tea untouched in front of me. "This is consuming you." He was right, of course. As much as I wanted to be strong, as much as I tried to convince myself that I had done what was necessary, The guilt was eating me from the inside. I returned to therapy, this time with a psychologist specializing in post-traumatic stress disorder in Philadelphia. Dr. Lucy was a woman in her 50s, with gentle eyes and a voice that seemed to wrap around you like a warm blanket on a winter night. In our first session, she told me something I never forgot. Carla, feeling guilty for taking a life, even in self-defense, isn't weakness. It's humanity. It would be much more concerning if you felt nothing. For months, we worked on old and new traumas, Mark's abuses throughout the marriage, the escape to Pittsburgh, the return to Harrisburg, and finally, that fateful night. You didn't want to kill him, she would constantly remind me. You wanted to survive. There's a fundamental difference. It was a slow, painful, but necessary process. Like cleaning an infected wound, it hurts terribly at the moment, but it's the only path to true healing. I sold the house in Harrisburg, of course. I would never be able to sleep peacefully in that room again. Every corner held memories that I needed to leave behind. With the money from the sale, I bought a small apartment in Philadelphia, near Raphael. It wasn't big or luxurious, but it was mine. A safe space, without ghosts. One afternoon, while arranging moving boxes, I found an old photo album. Photos of my wedding to Mark, of the first years together, of baby Raphael in his father's arms. It was like opening a box of poisoned memories. Sitting on the floor of the empty living room, I flipped through those pages with a lump in my throat. We were so young, so full of dreams. In some photos, he smiled at me with what seemed to be genuine love. How could everything have gone so wrong? When exactly did that loving smile transform into the mask of hatred I saw for the last time? I thought about burning the album, destroying all those memories, but something stopped me. Those photos were part of my history, no matter how painful it was. Denying the past would be denying a part of myself. I put the album in a box at the back of the closet. Maybe one day I could look at it without feeling that mixture of pain, anger, and pity. Maybe one day. In the months that followed, I tried to rebuild my life once more. At 52, I felt strangely like a teenager, insecure, searching for my place in the world, learning to live again. Philadelphia was a big, anonymous city, so different from Harrisburg, where everyone knew my name and my story. I started teaching in an adult literacy program. It was initially volunteer work, just to occupy my mind and feel useful again. But it soon became much more than that. It became a passion, a purpose. My students were people like me in many ways. They had faced adversities, carried invisible scars, were trying to start over. There was Mrs. Johnson, a 68-year-old lady who had raised 6 children alone and never had the chance to study. Mr. Wilson, who had worked in construction since he was 12 and hid from his colleagues that he couldn't read. Sheila, a victim of domestic violence who had fled from her husband with 3 small children. Each story I heard was a mirror where I saw reflections of my own journey. And each small victory of theirs, the first word read alone, signing their own name without help, self-confidence slowly growing, was also my victory. You're different from other teachers, Sheila told me one day after class. We feel like you understand, you know? That you've been through bad things too. I smiled, holding her calloused hands between mine. Pain only makes sense if we transform it into something good, Sheila. If it helps other people. It was at that moment, in that simple conversation with a student, that I had an epiphany. The true revenge against Mark, against everything he represented, wouldn't be hatred. Not even his death. It would be transforming the suffering he caused me into strength to help other women. The next day, I sought out a shelter for women victims of domestic violence in Philadelphia. I offered myself as a volunteer, to teach, to listen, to simply be present. The coordinator, a middle-aged social worker named Regina, listened to my story attentively. Your testimony would be invaluable for our women, Carla, she said at the end. Showing that there is life after abuse, that it's possible to rebuild, to start over. That's worth more than 1,000 theoretical lectures. I started slowly, just a few hours a week. I helped with practical tasks, organizing donations, assisting with activities for the children, teaching basic notions of financial management for women who, like me once, needed to learn to live on their own after years of dependency. Gradually, I opened up, sharing parts of my story when I felt it could help. Not as an emotional dump, but as an extended hand. And I understand, I've been where you are. In 2006, Raphael surprised me with a proposal. Mom, I've been thinking, what do you think about formalizing this work you've been doing? Creating a nonprofit, something structured to help more women? My son, always so practical, had already researched everything. The legal procedures, the costs, the possibilities for partnerships. Julia, his girlfriend at the time, now my dear daughter-in-law, worked at a company that had funds for social projects and could be a first sponsor. Son, I don't know if I have the capacity for something so big, I confessed, genuinely frightened by the dimension of the project. Mom, he held my hands, looking me in the eyes with that mixture of affection and determination that always reminded me of his maternal grandfather. You've already done much more difficult things in life. This would just be formalizing what you already do naturally. And thus was born Project New Beginning, a small nonprofit dedicated to offering free legal, psychological, and educational support for women victims of domestic violence. We started small, me, Raphael, Julia, and 2 friends I made in volunteer work. Our first headquarters was a tiny room lent by a church in downtown Philadelphia. Our first official case was Mariana, 28 years old, 3 small children, married for 10 years to a man who regularly beat her. When I met her, she was wearing sunglasses to hide her black eye and long sleeves in the January heat to cover her marked arms. I can't leave him, were her first words. I have nowhere to go. I have no way to support my children. I don't know how to do anything. They were words I knew well, the same ones I repeated to myself for years, the invisible chains that kept me tied to Mark for so long. Mariana, I replied, I'm going to tell you a story, my story. In the weeks that followed, we worked together on her case. A lawyer friend of Raphael's handled the separation process pro bono. A volunteer psychologist attended to Mariana and the children. I helped her prepare a resume, train for job interviews, recover the confidence that abuse had shattered. 2 months later, she was in a small but safe apartment with a part-time job that allowed her to care for her children and, most importantly, free. Free from fear, free from violence, free to start over. You saved my life, she told me, hugging me the day she moved. No, Mariana, I gently corrected. You saved your own life. I just showed you it was possible. The success of Mariana's case brought others. One by one, women began to seek us out, often brought by friends we had already helped. Each story was unique. Each situation required a different approach. But the core was always the same. Women trapped in abusive relationships by fear, financial dependence, children, shame, or the terrible combination of all these factors. The project grew organically. In 2007, we secured a larger headquarters, permanent staff, partnerships with companies and public agencies. Raphael, trained in engineering but with a natural talent for administration, took care of the financial and structural part. I was the heart of the operation, the bridge between the women we helped and the services we offered. It was in that same year that Raphael and Julia got married. Seeing my son walking to the altar, an upright, respectful, gentle man, the opposite of his father in every way, was one of the greatest joys of my life. You did it, Mom. Helen, my sister, whispered during the ceremony, squeezing my hand. You broke the cycle. Those words meant more to me than any compliment I had ever received, because my greatest fear, during all those years of abuse, was that Raphael would repeat the pattern, that the violence he witnessed in childhood would mark him irreparably. Seeing him there, vowing love and respect to a strong and independent woman, was confirmation that we had won. Really won. In 2008, my first granddaughter, Clara, was born. Holding her in my arms for the first time was an almost mystical experience. That small life, so perfect, so full of possibilities, represented the continuation of a lineage now purified from the poison of abuse. She'll grow up knowing her worth, Mom, Raphael told me as I rocked my little granddaughter. She'll never accept less than respect and true love. As you taught me. The following years were of constant growth, both for the project and for me personally. In 2010, we were invited to expand our work to other cities in Pennsylvania. In 2012, we published a booklet on identification and prevention of abusive relationships that was adopted by public schools throughout the state. In 2015, at 62 years old, I received an invitation to give a lecture at the University of Pennsylvania about our work. I remember the nervousness I felt climbing onto that stage in front of hundreds of social work, psychology, and law students. "I'm not an academic," I began, my voice trembling. "I'm just a woman who lived to tell a story, and who decided to transform that story into a bridge for other women." I spoke for almost 2 hours, sharing not just my personal experience, but everything we had learned in the project over the years. The alarming statistics of domestic violence in America, the patterns that repeated themselves in different social classes, age groups, educational levels, the barriers that prevented women from leaving abusive relationships. At the end, during the question session, a young student raised her hand. "Mrs. Carla, after everything you experienced, after almost being killed by your ex-husband, how did you manage not to let yourself be consumed by hatred? How did you find the strength to help other people instead of simply trying to forget?" The question caught me by surprise. No one had ever asked this so directly. I thought for a few moments before answering. "Hatred is like a poison you drink, expecting the other person to die," I finally replied. I realized that continuing to hate Mark, even after his death, would be allowing him to continue controlling my life, my emotions, my future. True liberation came when I understood that the best revenge wasn't wishing harm on him, but building something good from the harm he did to me. That answer, which came almost intuitively, represented a truth that I myself only fully understood at that moment. My true revenge against Mark wasn't the scissors I plunged into his chest that terrible night. It was each woman we helped leave an abusive relationship, each child who would grow up without witnessing violence at home, each cycle of abuse we managed to break. That's what I want to share with you today, my dears. That true justice doesn't necessarily come from the courts, although they are important. True justice, true liberation, comes from transforming our pain into purpose, our scars into strength to help others. Today, at 72 years old, I look back and see a life that, despite all the pain, was worth living. I have 3 wonderful grandchildren, Clara, now 17, following in her father's footsteps in engineering, Peter, 14, passionate about music and literature, and little Louise, 10, who tells me she wants to be a helper of women, like Grandma when she grows up. Project New Beginning continues to grow, now with offices in 5 cities in Pennsylvania, helping hundreds of women annually. Raphael has taken over the executive direction, bringing innovation and strategic vision, while I continue as a kind of senior advisor, or as the team girls affectionately call me, the soul of the project. Mark has been gone for almost 20 years, but the legacy he left wasn't of destruction, as he intended. It was of construction, of healing, of transformation. Not by his merit, of course, but because we chose, Raphael and I, not to allow evil to have the last word in our story. If you're watching this video and identify with any part of my story, I want you to know, you are not alone. There is a way out. There is a new beginning. There is life, full, rich, meaningful, beyond the walls of the house that became your prison. And if you know someone who may be living in an abusive situation, don't close your eyes. Extend your hand. Sometimes all a woman needs to find the courage to leave is to know that someone will be there to hold her when she takes the first step. My dears, before ending this video, I'd like to ask a special favor. If this story touched your heart, please leave your like and subscribe to the channel. Each subscription helps us reach more people, more Carlas, who may be watching secretly, seeking strength to change their lives. Thank you for listening to me this far. Always remember, your story doesn't end in the painful chapters. You have the power to write a different ending. I did it. You can too.